Welcome to The Hindu. I am Syed Muhammad. I am joined by Daneesh Majid, the author of The Hyderabadis from 1947 to the present day, a book on Hyderabad. The book is an addition to the corpus of literature on Hyderabad. We have been seeing a renewal, or rather a revival of interest in Telangana as well as Hyderabad post the formation of the state. Danish, welcome to The Hindu.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, the first thing that struck me when I read the book was usually when books about the history of a city are written, they tend to be rather academic in nature. Not that your book lacks academic rigor, it doesn't. But you have interviews of people, people are speaking about their history, or rather Hyderabad through their eyes or the eyes of their forefathers. How did the idea come about? What prompted you to take this approach?
What prompted me to take this approach was the fact that there was already existing literature on what happened during the partition in 1947. Those stories, for the most part, though, were centered around Punjab, Bengal, North India, and Sindh. And a lot had transpired during those times, not just through the eyes of the statesmen and those who steered a lot of interesting episodes of history from positions of power, but it was also people who suffered due to a lot of these machinations of people who are up in very high places. And it was very fun and evocative to read that literature. However, one thing I noticed that Hyderabad was not really featured prominently in these books or even films that centered around what happened in 1947 and 1948. So that's one reason. And second, when I worked for Siyasat.com, I was interviewing a prominent NRI who had once spent time in Riyadh. He came back about a decade or 15 years ago to Hyderabad, and I was asked to interview him. Upon meeting him, I found out that his family had his lineage spanned all the way back to the power corridors of Hyderabad during the Nizam's time. So when 1948 happened, life for him and his family changed. They were no longer a part of the upper echelons of society that really held sway in Hyderabad. And his family's story of how they navigated more difficult times after there was no longer, the Asif Jahi dynasty was no longer in power, that was really fascinating to me. And once I heard his story, that's when I knew that Hyderabad needs to be featured more prominently in narratives about 1947/48. Hence the decision to write this book.
Mm-hmm. There is a passage in your book which speaks about how the mother of one of your subjects was dejected when the fall of Hyderabad happened, and she let out a sigh, in a manner of speaking, and so why do you think that this was so? What do you think the reason was? Because we usually the state of Hyderabad, rather the state of Hyderabad under the Asif Jahi dynasty, is looked at from a rather, from a different perspective. Of course, there was feudalism, yes, of course, but apart from that, there was composite culture, so on and so forth. So how do you reconcile that with what your subject says in the book, and with the true nature of the Asif Jahi dynasty or the Hyderabad state as such?
Yeah.
So the subject I believe you're referring to is Apparasu Srinivasa Rao.
Yes.
His mother, Sampatamma Rao, she had seen the good side of the Nizam rule, and that is partly because she came from a family that was very close to the bureaucratic / ruling machinery, and the family that she even married into also was of such stock as well too. So sometimes it's not just about reconciling, because what microhistory, which is basically asking big questions in smaller places outside the corridors of power. They are sometimes in contravention to state level narratives or more mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream narratives. So sometimes it's not really about, trying to find synergy between them, because both narratives, they have truth to them. But this is where micro-histories are needed to shed more light on aspects that mainstream narratives usually sometimes not even disregard, but I feel like people who are in charge of these mainstream narratives, they don't necessarily have the time, the wherewithal, or the resources to venture into these places where people in quote unquote smaller places can be asked the questions to provide a more nuanced perspective on any specific era or historical period.
One of the things that comes to mind when we speak about the history of Hyderabad is Operation Polo, and I believe that is an important aspect of your book. Uh, Given Operation Polo, given 1948, that is, uh, how important do you think that these micro histories are, and to record them, given that some of the subjects are, in a manner of speaking, quite old, and largely a lot of the generation which saw 1948, or the generation which had an idea of these histories, is slowly going away. How important is it to record these and to keep talking about these histories?
It is very, very important. I cannot stress how much more work needs to be done, because I think within the next 5 to 10 years, these first-hand stories will disappear, because that generation is no longer either. Many of these people are no longer either healthy to talk about these, or their memories are fading. So it's best if Hyderabad especially has a young group of people who have taken upon themselves to preserve the city's heritage, or the overall Deccan region's heritage. And these kind of micro histories about historical periods are very important, and they need to be recorded, be they first-hand stories or second. Obviously, the first is more preferable. But why they're also important is because, as I mentioned, mainstream narratives in the form of culture production, be it cinema or literature that's published by a lot of these big publishing houses too, they're very much some of these pieces of cultural production can be a little too biased towards the certain trends that have gained steam in this country for the past decade or so. So it's important that we take it upon ourselves and even train a new generation of chroniclers to get these histories, because ultimately patronage is not always going to be there. There are times where you'll have it or you won't. So it's up to people like yourselves and other wordsmiths to train this new generation, whoever's a part of who has the know-how of the publishing industry, the film world, documentary film world. So I think we have to also make ourselves accessible to these people, and at the same time, some of these people need to also feel free to come and get a hold of folks like us too.
Yeah. One of the subjects you deal with is Umar Farooq Qadri, who is at the moment a student leader from Maulana Azad National Urdu University. Just tell us about his story. It's a very fascinating story, given the fact that they moved to Hyderabad in certain different set of conditions.
Not only is it a fascinating story, it's also quite the story about as to how I met him. Because at Maulana Azad National Urdu University, if one is to spend a certain amount of time there, especially in these student spaces where they're just hanging out, having fun before, after class, you'll see a lot of people who are from outside Hyderabad. And most of these students are from Jammu, Kashmir, even Andhra, or North India. However, when I heard Umar Farooq Qadri talking in a more Dakkani accent of Telangana / Hyderabad city, that was pretty interesting to me. And then we also happened to just be introduced by a mutual friend. And when we started speaking, he told me that his family, they're originally from Marathwada, a small village in Marathwada called Bamini. And he said how overnight they had been rendered paupers. हालांकि उन लोग जागीरदार खानदान के थे. He said जागीरदार की एक अमीर लोगों की जिंदगी से हम लोग गरीब की जिंदगी में रातों रात आ गए. So they had to leave Bamini Latur after what transpired during 1948 for them. To find out what exactly happened, you have to read the book. But
No spoilers.
exactly.
Yeah.
So rato rat un logon ko nikalna pada. They went to another part of what is present day Maharashtra, and then they made their way to Telangana, and then Telangana is where their rehabilitation began, and the Jamaat-e-Islami played a crucial role in socioeconomically reviving them as well. And the patronage
He's associated with the Students Islamic Organization.
Yeah, the
an
SI.
affiliate of Jamaat Islami.
His father became a Jamaat-e-Islami member, and upon becoming a Jamaat-e-Islami member, they had to shed whatever little remnants of both their Sufi identity, because Khadri, his last name was Khadri, which denotes that their lineage goes back to a Sufi lineage, to a Sufi school of thought, and they also had to shed their landlord identity as well. Because present day Maharashtra mein, they were landlords as well. So those are certain traits they had to shed. And then that journey from Telangana, from rural Telangana to Hyderabad city, how he then eventually was groomed to also become a student leader at the Maulana Azad National Urdu University, that was particularly fascinating for me.
An inalienable part of Hyderabad's history is the Ittihadul Muslimin and the Razakars, right? I was hoping to see a little more of the present day AIMIM, the All India Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin, which I believe is has nothing to do with the Razakars. That's what Mr. Asaduddin Owaisi has said time and again, and yet. There is the issue, the Razakar issue is very sticky. How do you deal with this particular subject in your book?
And the Majlis features in the book, but like I mentioned, I didn't want to focus too much on certain political parties, like the national ones, like the Indian National Congress, or even the present day ones, or even the regional ones as well. Though I will say the Communist Party is featured a bit more. I kind of deviate from that little rule of not focusing too much on parties, because their role has been very much overlooked in helping Hyderabadis emerge from the 1948 police action and the Telangana rebellion. But that's besides the point. That's not the question you asked.
The reason why I asked you about the present day MIM is because of the fact that there is a section of society which believes that the IMIM is, in a manner of speaking, it gave the Muslims post 1948 of a political voice. Also, the fact that the tussle between Sultan Salahuddin Owaisi and Amanullah Khan is legendary in a manner of speaking, right? So that's where the question stems from.
I didn't delve too much into that, but maybe that's probably good fodder for another book,
perhaps.
Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, and now slightly in a lighter vein, if you will, and I think I've asked you this elsewhere. You start with a couplet. Each chapter starts with a couplet, which is in Urdu. I was wondering why you didn't choose Dakhni, because there is again, much like an interest in a revival of interest in Hyderabad, there has been a revival in interest in Dakhni as a language, as a language of the Deccan.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to know about that. Why not Dakhni and why chased Urdu?
Well, before the start of Apparasu Srinivasa Rao's chapter, I do include a line from Gili Nalgundi's poem, Yadundi Telangana. O Chennarandi Mama, where is Telangana? I started off with that. So,
but most of it is Urdu.
Most of it's Urdu.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's not that I think Dakkani is inferior to more quote unquote traditional Urdu, because most of my research and study of Dakkani, it's been limited to poetry. And I'm sure if you do go to places like Manu, you'll find experts who have probably studied the prose that's been written in the Dakkani language. I just happen to have read mostly prose, even prose that's set in Hyderabad, in what is mostly chaste Urdu. But however, in certain poetry and prose, you'll see within Nastali script, idar each written that way. And but if I am to read a whole poem in Dakkani, it's a little tough for me because I'm more used to reading and consuming the traditional Urdu. So it'll take a little while for me to really get through Dakkani poetry in a more swift manner when reading it. So yeah.
And Dakkani is also associated with composite culture because it has words from Marathi, from Telugu, from Kannada, and of course Urdu and Turkish also. So in this connection, how do you think the cosmopolitan culture of Hyderabad has been? Do you touch upon that as well?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's Dakkani or even the attire, Hyderabad, there are many case studies of Hyderabad's cosmopolitan culture. Sherwaniyan Kayas bhi pehante the, Musalman bhi pehante the. Even certain people of the landed gentry who were Telugu speaking, वो लोग भी शेरवानी पहनते थे. And khana, if you go to certain Telangana weddings, you as a Muslim, you'll feel like ये तो अपनी शादी है with the kind of food that's served. Talawa gosh वहाँ पे मिलता, बहुत और बिरयानी भी देते वो लोग. So wherever you go, even today, despite its dilution due to various factors such as globalization, etc., वो दक्कनियत बोलो या वो गंगा जमुना, sorry, not गंगा जमुना, ईसा मूसा तहजीब कायम है. उसके अलग अलग नमूने मिलते रहेंगे आपको.
Daneesh Majid, thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.